Hey guys, so for this week's assignment, you get to watch and hear me on video. Okay, so for this week, your topic is going to be livestock identification equipment. The next few clips, I'm going to show and explain to you briefly different livestock tools that we commonly use in the livestock industry. I know that you may already know a lot of these, and that's great, especially since we use a lot of this stuff at the school farm. But it's always a good review and always good learning aspect, because whether or not you want to continue on with animal science in your coursework or with your job or even as a hobby, it's going to be very important that you know what these pieces of equipment are, what they're used for, what the disadvantages and advantages are, because we do have choices in the industry just like with any other career. So like I said, the next few clips are going to be of me explaining the different livestock equipment pieces. After you have watched the video, I'd like you to take the Google Forms. That's kind of a review of what we talked about. Okay, this tool is called an ear tagger. Hopefully you guys recognize this one. We've definitely used this at the school for the calves when we brought them over to ear tag, and also whenever the cows there at the school have lost their ear tags. So this is a non-permanent way to identify a lot of our livestock species. It's one of the most common ways we identify them. One of the advantages is that we can see these numbers from a decent distance. There are some disadvantages to this as well. Because it's kind of like an ear piercing, it could definitely fall out, and does fall out pretty often. Also, as you can see here, this particular one is called an Allflex. There are different brands. Unfortunately, for the most part, you have to have a certain tag for a certain brand of ear tagger. So that can be a disadvantage if you don't have the right equipment pieces altogether. This piece is very similar to an ear tagger, and it is considered an ear tagger, but it is a metal ear tagger. As you can see, there's a piece in there that is a premise ID tag that we have to have for cattle over a certain age. And we also use those ear tags to bring them to market. And before we bring them to market, they have to have that so that they know where they came from. But it works just the same essentially, except it kind of hooks more to the side of the ear rather than towards the middle of the ear. These are syringes. The left one is going to be a reusable syringe, as you can see. Okay, it's much more hardy. Okay, but it works just the same. Okay, this one's more of a disposable one. As you can see, it is measured in milliliters. Okay, it's important to know that milliliters and cubic centimeters are the same thing, or we'll call them, just shorten it to cc. So ml equals cc. So that's important to know. That's the measurement that we use to give liquid medication injections to our livestock species. Associated with the syringes, of course, are the needles that attach to them. We have different gauges of needles and lengths of needles depending on the livestock species. Usually the smaller animals tend to get a thinner gauge or a higher gauge. The lower the gauge, the thicker it's going to be. These ones are going to be more for our cattle. You guys should recognize this piece of equipment as a tattoo gun. This goes directly into the animal's ear. Most of our registered livestock species have to have a tattoo in their ear, so we use this a lot for our goats, with our cattle, and with rabbits as well. So we would put the sequence of letters and numbers of what their registration number should be right here. And we'd press down in the middle, towards the middle of the ear with ink to get a permanent method of identification that we can see. One of the disadvantages to this is that you have to actually be right next to the animal to look inside the ear to see their identification number. Okay, these are implant guns. Implant guns are used in the ear of cattle. Each of them will have little pellets that have an estrogen-based hormone in them, and that increases the growth more efficiently and effectively in our cattle species. This tool is called a drench gun. This one's specifically for cattle as it's so large, but we do have smaller ones for goats and for lambs. But the liquid medication portion goes in here, and this drench gun goes directly into the mouth of the animal and then into the stomach if we have to give oral liquid medication. This piece of equipment is used for dehorning. It's a method that we use. If the animal's horns are pretty long, we can only use it if it's relatively long, but is a cable or a wire dehorner. This is the portion that you would hold on to, and you would essentially kind of saw it as if you're using a regular hand saw. You would saw off the animal's horns towards the base. You guys should recognize this one. This one's a heat lamp. We use this obviously on cold days when we have cold days here in Florida. But we also use it for very, very young animals, regardless of kind of what the temperature is, because they have to stay at a pretty high temperature when they're very young, such as young piglets and such as chicks. Those are the common species that we would use those in. But also, again, if it's for cold days, we can use this for any of our livestock species. This piece of equipment is called a show stick. This is especially important for you guys to know because all of our animals at the school are show animals, and so this is specifically for cattle. Okay, it's used as a calming mechanism in the show ring and also to help set their feet up correctly so that they are presentable to the judge. This piece of equipment is called an elastrator or a banding tool. We use this mostly as a castration method for our calves and for our lambs. We can use it as a docking method for our lamb tails as well. For terms of castration, which is what we would use it mostly for, there's a small thick rubber band that goes on these corners of the tool. As you can see here, it's expanded all the way. The testes would go through, both testes would go through here, okay, and we would release the handle over the spermatic cord. Eventually, it would cause necrosis, which is the dying of the tissues and cells, and the testes and the scrotum would eventually fall off. One of the disadvantages of this, it does take longer for this to happen, of course, rather than doing the surgical method of castration. However, it is a cleaner method of castration, so that is an advantage to it. This tool is called a hoof trimmer. Sometimes it'll be known as a foot rot shear because that is what we're trying to prevent when we use these, is foot rot, which is an infection of the hoof. We use these mostly for our lambs and for our goats. You should recognize this because we use this a lot for our goats. It is used to trim off and take off excess portion of the hoof of each of the hooves to try to prevent hoof rot. This piece of equipment is known as a creep feeder. This is used for calves when we are weaning them off their mom's milk. Okay, the calves, you can see they can fit through these portions, but the cows cannot. And then we put the feed inside this covered area here so that only the calves are able to get to it and not the cows. This piece of equipment is known as a squeeze chute, just like the red one that we have at the school. This one's just larger because it's meant to handle larger cows. But it works just the same. It catches them at the head. It squeezes them on the side so that way we can do any procedures that we need to do to maintain animal health.